Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro, and it's time to review Dune Part 2, directed by Mr. Denis Villeneuve. You know what it is. Our thoughts on the first one. We both agreed. We were in awe of the spectacle of the film, but it felt like a Part 1. It just felt like it was building things up. Because Dune Part 1 ends on Timothée Chalamet becoming the maybe messiah of the Fremen, I don't think the film can say that much given where it has to end. And so I'm not really left with that much after Dune Part 1 to chew on or mull over. And I really like the movie, but I even agree a little bit with detractors from Dune Part 1 who say that the film is slightly dull. But Part 2 was a huge improvement for me, as many people suggested it would be. Not only does the story feel more full, more complex, it ends in a place that kind of gets you thinking, and it does feel like if it did end here, it could be a complete story. You know, there would be a moral to it. I mean, yes, there is more to the arc. There is a little bit that's unfulfilled, which begs for a part 3. But I still think you could take something away from just the way it ends here. This was a huge improvement in terms of spectacle and even many of the craft elements that I thought couldn't be much better from the first. Part 2 ups the ante in its cinematography, its costumes, even the visual effects, production design. I can't remember the last time I was this immersed in a film, and given that there's CGI everywhere here, I could not sense a morsel of it. There was not a wrinkle in the illusion of the world that Dune was creating. Even at the resolution of 70mm IMAX, they are absolutely flawless. Yeah, I do think the cinematography is even an improvement. The first one had its share of flashy moments, but occasionally would look a bit grayish or flat. I think the images and the colors are more intense and emotive. I agree that it's operating on an entirely different level than like anything else in Hollywood, except for maybe what James Cameron does with Avatar in terms of the seamlessness of the visual effects, the immersion, and also the sound design is nuts. It's nuts. Like, there are parts where there's just like a pulsing, rumbling bass or just little like tinkles going on that are just there to tickle you and like give you some weird experience or have you feel things in your gut or like shake you a little bit with the sound. Like, just goes beyond typical sound design or even what music does. This film might have the best sound in a film I have ever seen. Just the level of detail in the sound was absolutely immaculate, and it felt like the score and the sound worked very cohesively to create the feeling that you have in every moment. And I think traditionally films have relied on orchestras to take you through beat by beat what you're supposed to be feeling. Dune, I feel, does the same thing, giving you sound for every single beat in every single scene. But they're like intensifying sounds that are organic to the scene and integrating Hans Zimmer's score, which is not super traditional when it comes to the arrangement and the instruments that are used. We tend to underestimate the amount that sound enhances visuals. It'd be quite something else if this film had basic sound or a basic soundtrack. I really don't think we would be as immersed in the movie. Just an amazing testament to the ability for sound to amplify image. But obviously all of this is orchestrated under Denis Villeneuve, and I think his real stamp is that he takes his time, he cherishes every single moment and every shot. It's hard to think of other blockbusters that have the kind of patience that this does. I've always loved how he builds up tension in his films. We can look at older examples of Sicario, where he focuses on them just driving the convoys through the town, the amount of world building and tension that creates. The scene in Arrival where they slowly approach the ship is like 5 minutes long. Most directors don't care about these moments, they just want to get to it. One moment in this film that reminded me of those great moments in his filmography was Timmy riding the sandworm. I love how they build up to it. You just watch the sandworm slowly come from the distance, using those little thumpers as some sort of pacemaker to heighten the tension. And even when Timmy's on the sandworm, it's not like he has to face all these crazy obstacles. Like, all that's happening is he's trying to like stand up. But it's so intense because Villeneuve recognizes that just sand blowing the shit out of him is exciting enough if he can really make you feel it. And I think the opening shot exemplifies all of that very beautifully. That POV from the ground where they're just waiting and you don't really know what kind of enemy is over the dune. Every second in time feels very fully realized. And also with the worm, you know, the reactions of the Fremen as he is riding it. Some really great editing there. I thought in general the use of reaction shots was very solid, very good in this movie. They cut to the right people to convey the right shock, like, you know, cutting to Javier Bardem when you're wondering if he's losing his faith. And the other thing Villeneuve does is utilize POV extremely well. We're never really getting a shot of action that's not from somebody's point of view or some ship's point of view, even when it's those like sweeping drone shots. Like they're not exactly drone shots, right? They're kind of like attached to a helicopter or something. And just watching a little bit of another movie will remind you that, oftentimes the camera is just sort of floating around. Villeneuve locking the camera down to the level of the characters. That imitation alone, I think, brings you into the movie a whole lot more, and it lets you feel the size of all these machines around them that are trying to like mine the sand as they're destroying them. For example, let's try to envision Timmy riding a worm, and we're just looking at him from the front, but then the camera cranes up and it zooms out so we can get a bigger picture of what this looks like. That shot never happens in Dune. It is much more powerful to either be on the worm or to be watching with the Fremen. I was happy that even though Dune 1 exists and there was a lot to say about the spectacle of that film, I still come away from this movie feeling like there's so much else to say about the craft of this movie that's separate from the first one, or that's just enhanced or built upon. Spectacle and crafts aside though, the reason I ultimately like this movie better is because Timothée Chalamet's character has something going on. You can't say he doesn't have anything going on in the first movie. What does he have going on? It's the same thing where he's trying to figure out if he's the Messiah. This movie's kind of about him wondering if he should be humble, live among the Fremen, learn from them, or if he is a towering figure among all. How much of this is his ego, or how much of this is him rationalizing that, like, oh, well, if I'm the Messiah, then I better lead these people. Like, in this movie, there's the question of whether or not he wants revenge, which his father would disapprove of. It seemed like the philosophy of his father was to lead with morality, whereas there seems to be this like greater fate of the universe that is kind of determined by like the Christopher Walken king or whatever, and by the Bene Gesserits. Like, you don't even know how much they have influenced like this path that Paul is on too. Like, there's a lot of questions about what factors are really influencing this. There's a bunch of prophecies about what he's going to be that he seems to be fulfilling, but we don't know if that's the work of like the Bene Gesserit. This prophecy is also clashing with his vision of the future, which is that he's gonna fuck it up. And this abandons the philosophy of Zendaya's character, which is that everybody's equal and nobody should be held to like a higher power. I mean, there's a lot of these questions that are kind of in the movie that get muddled up in a way that I like. I think there's an interesting ambiguity to these questions. There's the direction that the people from House Atreides want him to go in. There's Zendaya. There's the Bene Gesserits. And then there's, does he form some sort of identity on his own? Like, what will he decide? The Fremen initially were weary of him because maybe he has like some sort of savior complex, and like, does he have that? He definitely proves that he can be more than that, and that he could be earnest and could be sincere, but like, we're still not 100% sure. And in the end of the movie, there's still a little bit left open. Like, will he be a good ruler? You know, he's about to take up a huge mantle of power for the third Dune. Part of me feels like there is a lot leaning on the future of the Dune films, slash the prophecy that he has in his head. Like, if he didn't have a prophecy in his head that was telling him that like this would be bad, then it'd be pretty easy for him to be like, well, look, I'm like these people's leader and they really like want me to lead them to freedom. We're obviously supposed to think that where Paul ends up in the end of the movie is bad. But do we think that because in the movie we're shown how there's a problem when one person seeks all this power? Or are we told that it's going to be bad because what's going to happen is going to be bad? Because we have this future prophecy. So I feel like a lot is resting on like this intuition that he has of the future. Even the intuition, he doesn't know exactly why that's there, I don't think. There's a spiritual warfare going on, right? It could just be that the only spirituality is like Bene Gesserits and just the ability for them to control people's psyches. But then you also have to wonder like whether he could possess some sort of intrinsic spiritual power of his own, which would make him like a truly the one by a sort of traditional reading of what that means to be the one in movies. And, you know, in this movie, he's like a maybe, maybe not the one. And we can't know because the psychic warfare is so powerful. We don't even know what the spiritual politics of like Dune overall are. I think these questions are interesting, but I think that they'd be more interesting with some answers. I feel like I really want to know like how much of the influence is like the Bene Gesserits. Like, I feel like that matters a lot to me. An example of a sequel that leaves you with an ambiguous moment with the character, but there's still a lot of interesting questions is The Dark Knight. You are at once left with a lot of questions, a lot to grapple with, a lot to think about, but it doesn't feel incomplete. And you don't even need another movie like to fulfill the promises of it. I think Dune Part 2 works better in this regard than the first one. But I still am feeling that a little bit. After 5 hours of Dune, perhaps there's not as much that I feel like I'm connecting with on a deep level, but I do think that it's still like an improvement on the first in this way. I just have like mixed praise for that part of the film.
Yeah, but I agree that if there's no part 3, a lot of these threads feel unsatisfying, and I do have confidence that part 3 is going to close all of these threads. I'm so excited for Dune Messiah now.
Performances, I think Timmy has more to work with here. I was more captivated by him. I thought that his character's shift when he either realizes or like becomes the whatever it's called, don't know how to pronounce it, don't know how to spell it. I actually thought he played that quite well. I was surprised with how commanding he was. My favorite performance here though has to be, it's Javier Bardem. I think that he elevated that character beyond what other actors would have given it. And he also added a level of humor to that character, which I really enjoyed. You just buy so much in his belief or his want or his need to believe in Timothée Chalamet. And Austin Butler, I also thought exceeded expectations. Maybe he's a little one-dimensional as like a sociopath, but I still think that Austin Butler played this character with like a deep sociopathy. If they are gonna remake American Psycho, which I don't think they should, but they are thinking about it, this is like the one actor who actually might be excited to watch the movie if he was doing it. Very ferocious and scary in this movie. Yeah. The voice was really great too. He sounded like a baby Stellan Skarsgård.
I want to shout out Stellan Skarsgård here because I feel like he plays his character so well that he might go unnoticed. You know, the character doesn't have a whole lot of depth, so it's not one you're necessarily going to be thinking about. I love what he brought to Dune Part 1 and 2. I love the voice he created and just his whole demeanor, his sluggishness. Rebecca Ferguson was great here, and I loved her in the first one, especially on rewatch. Zendaya's great, Timothy's great. Yeah. Florence Pugh and Anya Taylor-Joy will be in the next films, and we'll see what they do.
Because Florence Pugh doesn't do anything yet.
No, she's going to do something in the next movie.
Yeah, but she doesn't do anything yet.
No, she doesn't do anything. Yeah, Christopher Walken is sort of weird, but he wasn't bad.
Doesn't really do anything yet.
The whole ensemble was great. I also love Dave Bautista.
We can segue into an awards talk if you want. To get it out of the way, like, yes, this movie's gonna get the same 10 nominations as Dune 1. I don't understand which category it could falter in. I just don't. But could it get more? Could it get more?
Right now, you know, super early predictions. We don't know what else is happening this year. But looking ahead, I don't see another film Dune-like or Avatar-like that's going to compete with Dune in the tech categories. Like, I just don't see it. Unless Megalopolis is like an Oppenheimer-level feat. But I'm not predicting that.
I mean, you have Furiosa, which also won a Dune amount of Oscars.
Maybe Joker 2.
It's sort of interesting, though, because I don't know how often it happens that movies just win the same awards over and over. I don't think they're going to have a problem giving it visual effects and sound. I think it'll probably win more than that. I think it just depends on the competition.
Yeah. Production design. Costumes. I actually think this costumes were an upgrade from the last one, and that it could win costumes. I think it's win competitive.
We'll see.
Score is actually one I'm not as confident it will win this time. I think the first one was more exciting because we had all of the themes introduced. And the second one recycles a lot of those themes, but is often just blasting you with unique sounds. I think it's totally worthy if you wanted to give Hans Zimmer another award, but giving Hans Zimmer another award might just be a little less compelling if there's some competition here.
I do think the score feels like it's flexing less in this movie than it was in the first one.
It's more integrated with the sound, is how I would put it. Cinematography, I feel strongly that this will win, actually. Going to be very hard to beat for Dune.
I think that I would predict Dune 2 to be nominated for director because I think that there will be a bigger call for him to win. Maybe the director's branch won't snub him again just because the movie's like more acclaimed, generally considered better, a little more complete.
I really think he could win for this. It's more impressive than the first one. There are some scenes that left my jaw on the floor, and I was like, there's just is no way that the director's branch and that everybody in Hollywood's not going to be paying attention.
Some people think it can win Best Picture, I guess, or at least like somebody tweeted such a thing after seeing everybody call it a masterpiece or something. I still think that it may be a bit too genre-y, or maybe it's not like the emotional type of movie.
I think it not being the final movie does matter here. Given that there's a little bit of a comma at the end of the film, it might not feel as vital to give it the Best Picture award.
If Dune came out this year, though, as it was supposed to, would he have gotten a director nomination?
He would have, yeah.
Because I think this year was more competitive. I think it's going to be easier for Dune to get a bunch of nominations next year. Just from what I see right now, I think that last year was more competitive. I also think that this movie could show some extra strength by getting a SAG Ensemble nomination.
Yeah,
This depends
I
on
agree.
a lot on the competition, but I don't think it's a
so.
lock for SAG Ensemble.
I wouldn't be surprised if people are trying to throw in Austin Butler into supporting actor or something like that. I just don't think this is going to get any acting nominations again.
No, I don't think so.
I just don't believe in it. I can't think of the performance where everyone would get behind them.
I think Austin Butler or Javier Bardem. I think Austin
Maybe
Butler's
Javier
performance,
Bardem.
I think he's too, like, just a terrible, terrible man. Javier Bardem, I don't know if it feels very urgent to nominate him, but
Yeah.
he's well respected.
He got nominated for Being the Ricardos. I would give Dune Part 2 a 9 out of 10. You know, maybe Dune Messiah can have my 10 out of 10 if everything is resolved.
I give Dune Part 2 an 8 out of 10. I still think that Villeneuve's hot streak was Sicario, Arrival, and Blade Runner 2049. I think that the Dune movies aren't quite up there for me.
Really?
Yeah.
I just thought this movie was incredible. Like, it was just incredibly made. I was completely transported. So happy with the final result.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you could do the voice to your dad, what would you say?